if your website is so slow and you have to lose customers on your website just because of the slowness of your website, I want to show you the reasons why the website is actually slow, and also profile some solution to what you can do to make sure that that becomes blazing fast. All right, so I'm going to mention a few, maybe 6 or 7, but doing just maybe a single one of them is actually going to impact the website positively. All right, and if you do all of the things that I'm about to show you in this video, it's going to make the entire website blazing fast. So number one, so some people actually have unoptimized image uploaded to their website. If you take the picture of an object, maybe with your phone or with your camera, and you try to often upload that to a website just that way, it's actually going to cause your website to be so slow. And the reason for that is just because of the size of the pictures that you took with a camera or with your phone. And some of them are actually in megabytes, while some are actually in even gigabytes. All right, so you don't just snap pictures with your phone or your cameras and then you feel like you want to just upload that directly to your website without optimizing the pictures for speed. So the solution to this, when you snap your picture with your phone or something like a big camera, what you need to do is you need to like make sure that you optimize that. And how do you optimize an image so that it can actually load fast on the web page? Number one, you can actually resize it. You can resize the entire image, maybe cut out the edges, the parts that are actually not important to actually be shown in your website. You can cut those parts off. All right, so that's the first thing you can do. And after you do that, maybe by cropping that out, you can also compress it. All right, so because I noticed that the size of those images used to be very high, but when you compress them, you see that it reduces the size of the image, and it may not like directly affect the quality of the image when you compress them. All right, especially if you're using a software that is actually good at compressing images without losing the sharpness. All right, so that's just basically called optimization. So you optimize that, make sure that you compress that, resize it, and it will look very sharp on the web page when you upload them. All right, so another thing I can also think of is to make sure that you use a modern file called something like WebP. So if you serve the image in a modern format like the WP, well, most images in that format normally they load quite a lot faster on web pages, so it wouldn't actually going to be dragging your website, and you are not going to be like your customers won't actually be like waiting forever before they can actually perform whatever task that they came to your website to perform and then leave. So that is just the first one that we have just taken a look at. So make sure you optimize the images that you are going to be using on any web page of your website. So the second thing that is actually causing your website to be too slow is if you have too many HTTP requests. Let's say the images you are using on your website, you are getting that through something like HTTP requests, maybe something like the styles and even the script that you're using. You are using separate you are making a separate request for all of those things to be able to show up on your website. All right, you need to like take a look at this and then minimize them by maybe combining the files and then using something like CSS Sprite to be able to make sure that it kind of loads a lot faster. All right, so instead of just making too many HTTP requests to get an image, maybe if you have like 1000 image, you're making requests to get like 1000 images into your website. All right, so the same thing applies to maybe if it is something like a JavaScript script on your website and something like style. All right, so if you're working with something like maybe getting the style of your website through something like HTTP requests, you can make use of something like a CSS Sprite to be able to reduce such a load. All right, so that's just that. So the third reason why your website is actually dragging or so slow is if you are using something like a poor hosting. All right, so if you're using a poor hosting, and what I mean by poor hosting is that the server response is actually so slow, it doesn't just respond fast enough for the requests that people actually make into your domain. All right, so for sure you should know by now that a slow server is equal to that of the slow websites. Okay, so if you have a slow server, it's going to like equal to the slow response of your website. It's going to a slow server cannot allow your website to load fast, and for you to be able to like find a solution for this is for you to make sure that the type of hosting that you use should be a type of hosting that maybe supports something like CDN, and What I mean by CDN is just content delivery network. It should be fast enough, and you should also consider something like an edge computing for performance. All right, so make sure that you are using a server that supports a CDN and it actually has a good rating. You need to check up whether such a server has a good rating on the internet, and check websites that are actually hosted on it to see how they perform before we can actually go ahead and then make use of such a host. All right, because slow hosting companies can actually cause your website to be really very slow a lot of the times. All right, so if they don't have a speedy server that they kind of serve your website is actually going to be very slow. So that is just that on that. So the next thing that may actually be causing your website to be so slow is if you have something like bloated code and then plugin. All right, and with that, this situation often arise if you have a messy HTML. All right, and don't minify the JavaScript and CSS and even too many plugins. And this, when we talk about plugins, we are actually referring, maybe you are using something like CMS, and that just because maybe with something like WordPress. All right, so those are the things that could actually also contribute to slowing down your website. So what I mean on this particular angle, talking about bloated code and plugin, is number one, make sure that your HTML are actually not messy. All right, and then your CSS are actually well written and the way they're actually supposed to be written, right? So because if you write it anyhow, it's actually going to cause the website to be so slowed down, and even the plugins that you're actually using on your content management system, like that of the WordPress. All right, so you need to like take a look at that and make sure that you don't have messy HTML, and make sure that you have minified CSS and JavaScript. Don't use unminified JavaScript and CSS on your website because it's going to actually cause that to be so slow. So that's just the point in there. So the next one, which is basically maybe this should be number 5, reason why your website is actually slow is maybe if you don't actually have caching strategy. All right, so it means that you have no caching strategy for your website, and every time your website tries to load, it's going to try to like load and refresh everything afresh. All right, so you need to like make sure that you implement browser caching strategy and also implement server side caching strategy. All right, to make sure that they don't actually like refresh every data for your customers to be able to use your website effectively each time they visit the website. So once you implement those caching strategies, it's going to help, like fasten the speed, the loading speed of your website, and you're going to be very surprised at the amount of speed that you're actually going to achieve or grab as long as you try to implement what we call a caching strategy. All right, now the next thing that may be causing your website to be so slow is what we call the render blocking resources. And with this, I'm just basically referring to maybe JavaScript and CSS that are kind of a load before the actual content of your website loads. All right, so they slow down your website. And if you're using something like JavaScript, you can begin to use something like async, all right, or async, no matter, depending on how you kind of pronounce that, or data to be able to load the content of your JavaScript. All right, and then when it comes to something like your CSS, you can maybe begin to learn how to use some inline CSS in order to make sure that your website loads a lot faster. And I know that inline CSS may make your the main web page a kind of look so messy somehow, but it's actually the best strategy to actually be sure that you the best strategy to use if you want to make sure that your website is kind of loaded faster. All right, so even though these days we often try to make use of external CSS so that the code on our HTML page would not actually have a combination of CSS and that of the HTML. All right, and that's just basically good, but make sure that you kind of add some inline CSS to your to every page of your website. At least the basic CSS that you may need, you can add that as an inline CSS, and that's actually going to help your website load a lot faster. So the next one that it kind of cause your website to be so slow, and I think that this is basically maybe the eighth point that I'm trying to make on this video. So it's actually called a third-party scripts. All right, and with third-party scripts, I mean maybe if you have something like social media embed code on your web page, or something like an advertisement. All right, so those things, they have to like load from an external website, and they often contribute to the slowness of your website. All right, but you can use the solution for this is for you to load those things asynchronously. All right, so use JavaScript asynchronous loading to be able to load that. It's going to make that your web page load a lot faster. All right, instead of like depending solely on such a slowness of the script that is actually coming from an external source. All right, so once you load that asynchronously, it's going to make a lot of changes to your website, and then it's going to in turn make sure that your website does not actually load so slow. All right, so that's just the point in there. So in conclusion right now, I want you to make sure that you do not actually lose your customers before your website loads. And if you want to do that, it means that doing any of the following that I've just mentioned can actually drastically kind of impact your website positively, and it's going to make it load faster. And do bear in mind that a fast website is going to be equal to a website that has a lot of SEO, because fast websites are actually a kind of a recommended. If you are working on, if you have a blog and you have a lot of content, they load a lot more faster or show up a lot more faster in search engines. All right, so make sure you don't lose a lot of customer, because fast website equals happy customers, and it's also equals good SEO. All right, so that's just the stuff in there. And if you have any contributions that you want to make to this video, you can go to the comment section and add that as a comment. So I would like to read your comments, and let's discuss in the comment section, guys. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye for now.